The afternoon was calm, the sound of distant traffic and the smell of impending rain in the air. I was heading home when suddenly, a loud crash cut through the silence. The sound of a car crashing violently, followed by the crack of metal and shattered glass. My heart raced in my chest as my mind tried to comprehend what was happening. I ran toward the noise without a second thought. I knew something serious had happened, but I never imagined it would change everything. When I arrived at the accident scene, what I found was terrifying. The car was completely destroyed, with parts scattered everywhere. But amidst the rubble, a faint, almost imperceptible cry caught my attention. A baby! In the back seat, trapped, still alive. Amidst the chaos, he was there, vulnerable, but miraculously unharmed. My eyes flicked to the parents. They were both immobilized, visibly seriously injured, but what struck me most was the sense that it all made no sense. Why was the baby doing so well, while his parents were in such critical condition? Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain, but I knew there was more to this story than just an accident. When paramedics arrived and began investigating the parents, the truth began to emerge, and what they discovered was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. What they revealed about the parents left everyone speechless. And what happened next would change the baby's life forever. The rain began to fall soon after the accident, heightening the tension in the air. The sound of drops hitting the asphalt mingled with the paramedics' shouts and the siren of the approaching ambulance. I was still there, beside the wrecked car, holding the baby in my arms, trying to remain calm. He was in shock, but his weak cries gave me hope that he would overcome the worst. What struck me most was how unharmed he seemed. The car was completely crumpled, the doors were smashed, and the window was completely shattered, but he was there, breathing, moving slightly, as if nothing had happened. As I tried to comfort him, my gaze kept returning to his parents. They were unconscious, their bodies bleeding, and the sight of it made my chest feel heavy. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics quickly began working. As they tried to stabilize the parents, I watched from afar. There was something deeply disturbing, a feeling that the scene wasn't as simple as it seemed. As much as they tried their best to save the parents, the coldness of the accident told me there was something much more complex behind it. It was then that I began to notice small details that seemed out of place. For example, how the position of the car didn't exactly match what I'd imagined for an accident of this kind. They were on a straight road, with no sharp curves or any other obstacles. Why would they lose control? How was the baby in stable condition, but the parents, so close by, in a critical situation? What was happening? The tension was rising by the second, and it was as the teams began investigating the car that something much more disturbing came to light. The parents weren't just injured in an accident. They were involved in something much bigger, something none of us could have imagined. What the doctors found and what they began to reveal about the parents would leave everyone speechless. And it was at that moment that I realized the story was just beginning, and the mystery unfolding had nothing to do with a simple car accident. The minutes passed, and the paramedics did what they could to stabilize the baby's parents. Both were being taken to the hospital in critical condition, but the silence that gripped the scene was thick. The baby was under the care of a nurse, but I couldn't help but wonder, how could someone survive such a violent accident while their parents were on the brink of death? I went to the hospital, trying to better understand the situation, but what I discovered upon arrival was much darker than I had imagined. The first thing that struck me was the doctor's demeanor. They were treating the situation with a coldness that seemed out of place. Sure, it was an emergency, but the way the nurses and doctors looked at each other hinted at something more. Something unspoken, but evident in the air. It was then that I discovered, through one of the paramedics who had helped me with the rescue, that the baby's parents were no ordinary people. They were involved in something much more complicated, something involving scientific experiments involving genetic manipulation. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but the paramedics' words haunted me. These two are more than just victims. They are pawns in a much bigger game. But what did this mean? I couldn't understand. How could a child's parents have anything to do with something so terrible? And the baby, why was he in better shape? There was something wrong with this story. The feeling that what was happening was more than a simple tragedy consumed me. As I tried to piece together this story, the police began investigating the baby's parents more deeply. And that's when more secrets began to emerge. During the search of their home, the officers found something no one expected: a series of documents and scientific research related to studies on genetics and human control. Most alarming, however, was the name of a secret foundation mentioned in all the documents: Renaissance. These documents spoke of genetic manipulation and life-creating experiments with unknown objectives. Worst of all, the baby's name was there, on one of the experiment lists. He wasn't a simple accident. He was part of a much larger study, a secret experiment in which his parents were involved. And this wasn't just ordinary scientific research. What they were trying to do was create a completely new future for humanity, using methods that bordered on the unthinkable. With each discovery, the tension mounted. The baby, who seemed like a walking miracle, was actually at the center of a secret, scientific plot full of conspiracies. The truth was beginning to emerge, but at the same time, I felt more lost than ever. What else were they hiding? And, most importantly, what did this mean for the baby's future? He was destined to be more than just a child. He was a key, a central piece in something bigger. The discovery of the Rinascimento Foundation was only the beginning, but the questions began to multiply. I could no longer ignore what was at stake. The baby, who had previously seemed like just a car accident victim, now revealed himself to be a key player in a sinister plot. I knew I had to uncover the truth, but with every step I took, more obstacles appeared. The authorities were beginning to investigate, but I could sense something was at play that they weren't telling me. Everything I'd learned about the baby's parents' past was being carefully suppressed. I knew I needed to act quickly, before the clues disappeared. The feeling that I was being watched wouldn't leave me alone, as if someone were trying to stop me from going any further. I sought out one of the only people who could still give me answers, one of the parents' former co-workers, who had known some information before he left. When I reached him, he seemed reluctant to tell me, but after much prodding, he revealed what seemed to be the most disturbing secret of all. They weren't just manipulating genetics to save lives. They were trying to create a new generation of humans, special beings. The baby, he wasn't an accident, he was designed. Those words paralyzed me. The baby, this innocent child, was part of a macabre scientific experiment, something far beyond anything I could have imagined. The parents were not only victims of their own choices, but they were also aware of what they were creating. They knew, somehow, that the baby's future was tied to something much greater than themselves. The man told me one more thing, something that made me realize time was running out. What's coming won't be good. They'll try to take the baby, whoever it is. They won't let anything destroy the project. The baby has to be protected, but not everyone wants it to live. It was at that moment that I realized the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just about the baby or the parents. It was a race against time to prevent something terrible from happening. The baby wasn't just a child. He was the key to something much bigger, something that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could change the course of humanity. I decided I needed to protect the baby, but who could help? I didn't know who to turn to. Everyone around me seemed involved in some way, and the baby was at the center of it all. What else didn't I know? What else was being hidden? As I delved deeper into the search for answers, the clues began to disappear. People close to the baby's parents became increasingly distant, and any attempt to find anything relevant seemed to be systematically blocked. It was as if someone wanted to stop me before I knew too much. And that's when the first major obstacle appeared. The Rebirth Foundation wasn't just scientific research, as I thought. It had much deeper ramifications. I wasn't just facing a genetic manipulation experiment, but a secret network of powerful people who controlled information. They wouldn't let me take the baby from them. I was no longer just an innocent bystander. I was becoming part of the problem, and my life was at risk. The tension only increased with each step. I had to make a choice: continue investigating and risk everything, or protect the child and risk losing any chance of stopping this conspiracy once and for all. The sense of urgency intensified, but with each new clue, the truth became more elusive. The situation was already reaching proportions beyond my control. Each new clue seemed to push me deeper into something even darker. Until then, I'd been simply trying to understand what was happening, but the truth I began to uncover wasn't just disturbing, it would change everything I believed to be real. The baby, I discovered, wasn't just a victim of the accident, but part of a much more complex and sinister project. And everything began to make sense when I found the file hidden in his parents' house. The file was stored in a safe that, apparently, no one else knew existed. It was like a closely guarded secret. When I managed to open it, I was stunned by what I saw. The baby's name was there, in a list of projects with codes and dates, and most frighteningly, next to his name was the names of his parents, with a title next to them that read Rebirth Project, Main Subjects. That file revealed what no one could have imagined. The baby's parents weren't just ordinary people, as everyone thought. They were involved in a secret scientific project, one that sought to create a new generation of humans with special abilities. The baby, as revealed in the documents, was specifically designed to be a survival experiment. That is, a child engineered to survive extreme conditions, genetically manipulated from the beginning. And that wasn't all. The file also mentioned an even more disturbing concept: replacement. The baby wasn't the only subject of the experiment, but he had been created to replace other children in a project that had been ongoing for years. They were creating an entire generation of higher beings, and the car accident was actually an attempt to cover up the flaw in the project. At that moment, I realized the baby wasn't just a victim of a car accident. He was a central piece of something much bigger. The accident wasn't an accident. It was an attempt to cover up the mistakes of a project that was out of control. I had the feeling I wasn't just investigating a simple accident. I was unraveling a web of lies that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined. The people behind this, the Renaissance Foundation, weren't just scientists or researchers. They were playing with human life in ways I had never imagined. And the baby I had rescued with such effort was the key to something that could change the fate of us all. I knew I needed to act quickly. Time was running out, and those behind this project would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. The baby was now in grave danger, as was everyone around him. But the big question was, how could I protect him and put an end to this conspiracy without putting my life, and his, in danger? After the revelation that the baby was part of an experiment, my mind filled with unanswered questions. What else was behind this? Who else was involved? I knew I needed to protect the baby, but I had no idea who I could trust. I felt like a pawn in a dangerous game, where every move could be fatal. With the documents revealing the name of the foundation, Rinascimento, and the parents' involvement in the experiment, the situation became even more tense. I had no choice but to investigate further, but now I knew I was dealing with something much bigger than I could have imagined. And the danger wasn't just to the baby, but to me as well. The feeling of being watched had never been so strong. I dug for as much information as I could, but the leads quickly began to disappear. Some of my once trustworthy contacts began to drift away. It felt like someone was after me, trying to make me give up on uncovering the truth. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the baby fall into the hands of people who saw him as nothing more than a pawn in an experiment. What was at stake wasn't just his life, but the truth everyone was trying to hide. Then I received an anonymous call. An unknown voice told me they knew what I was looking for and had vital information about what was really going on. The voice directed me to a specific location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. At first, I thought it was a trap, but the voice told me something that made me reconsider. The baby's future is in your hands. They can't control it. With my heart racing, I walked to the storage room. The place was deserted, dirty, with dim lights flickering, creating a sense of desolation. When I entered, I found a file on an old desk, lit only by a dim bulb. The file was marked with a Rinascimento Foundation seal, and upon opening it, more revelations emerged. The file's contents were more disturbing than I had imagined. It described the project's true goal: to create a generation of superhumans through advanced genetic manipulation. But most shocking of all was that the baby wasn't the only one. There were several others, all created as replacement parts for future society, without any right to choose. They would be used to control humanity's future. I began to understand the true magnitude of it all. The baby, like all the other experimentals, had been created to serve an agenda that went against everything I believed was right. Children were seen not as human beings, but as products, as tools for a future few understood. And this, more than ever, made me question how far these scientists and those behind the foundation were willing to go to continue the project. It was at that moment that I realized that if the baby were taken from me, he would be just another victim of an experiment that should never have happened. But who was behind it? Who was funding and controlling this entire secret operation? I knew I needed to find out before it was too late, but every step I took led me to more secrets and more danger. I wasn't just trying to save one child. I was trying to save everyone's future. The feeling of being followed became impossible to ignore. Every step I took felt like I was being watched, monitored. But the real surprise came one night when I was reviewing the Renaissance documents. The darkest truth appeared before me. In the storage archive, among other papers, I found a letter between two Foundation scientists. The content of the message was direct, and what was written stopped me in my tracks. The research wasn't limited to genetic manipulation to create humans with special abilities. The true goal was to create a new race of human beings. But the most disturbing thing was that this new generation wouldn't be composed of random children, as I had imagined, but copies of people from the distant past, historical figures, powerful leaders, and even people with extraordinary abilities. The baby wasn't a unique piece. He was a replica, a copy, created based on someone from the past. Everything started to make sense now. The car accident hadn't been an accident, but an attempt to hide a flaw in one of the experiments. The baby was there because he had been created from a genetic copy, and the experiment had failed. He was proof that the project was failing, and the Foundation knew it. That night, as I approached one of the scientists involved in the experiment, something caught my attention. His face was familiar, but I couldn't remember where. It was then that the most shocking truth was revealed. He was one of the baby's biological fathers. The man I saw before me wasn't just a scientist. He had directly contributed to the baby's creation, and what's more, he wasn't just hiding the project. He was actively participating in it. This revelation shattered me. The man who had led me to believe he was trying to stop the experiment was actually deeply involved. The story I believed to be a simple genetic manipulation plot was far more personal to him than I could have imagined. He wasn't just a scientist with good intentions. He had created the baby with a specific purpose, but what else was he hiding? The weight of the situation grew with each new discovery. The Foundation not only wanted to create a new generation of humans, but to replace historical figures, creating an elite that would rule the future. The baby, along with others, was no longer a victim, but a tool of control. They believed that by recreating great leaders, they could shape a more perfect future, a future that was, in their view, more sustainable. But who would decide what was perfect? They were playing God, altering the essence of people, creating copies of human beings to serve their own purpose. Now, the battle raging wasn't just for the baby's survival. It was for the truth. I needed to expose this project. I needed to tell the world what was happening in the shadows. But with every step I took, the foundation was closer to reaching me. And once again, the question lingered, who could I trust? The baby was my only connection to all of this, but I was beginning to realize he was more than just a connecting thread. He was the turning point. I was close to understanding the true extent of everything that was happening. But at the same time, it felt like with every step I took, the foundation was one step ahead. The pressure was mounting, and the baby, this being that seemed to have emerged from a nightmare, was the key to unlocking all the answers. But I didn't know how much I truly wanted to know. That's when a final discovery made me see everything differently. I was at home, reviewing more documents, when an unexpected phone call interrupted my thoughts. A familiar voice, calm but with a somber tone, said only one thing, "You're closer than you think." The moment I ended the call, what I saw on the table was something I couldn't believe. A red envelope with the foundation's seal. The address was in my name, but the return address was blank. Upon opening it, the contents were a detailed report about the baby, but it wasn't about his survival, nor about the project itself. The report was about me. And there, within the pages, was the most unbelievable revelation of all. I wasn't just a witness, I was part of the experiment too. I wasn't what I thought. The documents revealed that the Foundation had altered my own genetics without my knowledge, making me believe I was a simple citizen with no connection to the project. But the truth was I, too, was part of an early version of the experiment. I was one of the first copycats, created to test the limits of genetic manipulation. My parents, whom I believed to be just ordinary people, were actually Foundation agents. It was as if my entire life had been built on a lie. Everything I knew about my identity was in doubt. I wasn't just an observer of experiences. I was part of them, created for a specific purpose, perhaps even more important than the baby. In that moment, confusion gripped me. The baby, that innocent being who seemed to be the focus of the project, wasn't the only one. I, too, had been shaped for something. But what did that mean? And what else had they done to my life? And that was when the final revelation came. The baby wasn't the key to the experiment. I was. Project Rebirth wasn't about creating a new generation of human beings. It wasn't about saving lives or genetic manipulation for a greater good. The true mission was to create a new generation of leaders, a new lineage of people who would have control over everything. The baby and I, both created as key players, were just the beginning of an even greater plan. The future wouldn't be a fight for survival, but for total control of humanity. Now, with everything I knew, the only thing left was a choice. I could join those behind all this and accept the role I'd been given. Or I could finally fight what I'd become and try to destroy the experiment from within. The silence in the room enveloped me, as if the house itself were waiting for my decision. I knew there was no turning back. The game had become personal, and the only way to truly escape was to face it, not as a victim, but as someone who could finally control their destiny. The truth about who I was, about who we all were, no longer mattered. What mattered now was what I chose to do with what was left of me. The dark room seemed to close in on me, and for a moment I felt a wave of hopelessness, as if there was no solution to what was happening. I could run, ignore it, but that would never free me. The cycle would continue, and all my attempts to escape would be futile. I was, in a way, trapped, not only by the manipulation of my own memories, but by the idea that there was nothing real left in my life. I was a pawn in a game I didn't even understand. But then a single idea emerged. What would happen if I decided to create my own end? The game was never about how to escape, but about how to finish it. In that moment, I felt that the weight of the revelations that had accumulated within me was not meant to destroy me, but to empower me. I was no longer a puppet in the hands of unseen forces. Not anymore. I looked around the room and realized that, in a strange game of mirrors, there was something that made me unique. What made me different from the others who had been manipulated, brought back, and used as pawns? My ability to choose. That was what made the difference. It didn't matter where I came from or who I was. What mattered now was the decision I would make. I was tired of being controlled. I was tired of being part of something that made no sense. And, most importantly, I was tired of being a victim. I decided I would see it through. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I knew the fight against the Renaissance would be mine. I would face the truth, no matter the cost, because deep down, I knew that, at the end of it all, there was a lesson to be learned, a truth hidden beneath the pain and confusion. Saving a life doesn't just mean rescuing someone from a river. It also means saving yourself from getting lost in the endless cycle of manipulation and control. I looked around the house, at the documents and archives, at my grandfather's legacy and that of so many others that had been used, and finally understood. Because, in the end, saving a life is saving an entire world. The feeling of relief was slow but powerful. By taking control of my destiny, by finally understanding that I had a choice, I had broken the cycle. I knew that even if the system tried to pull me back into the darkness, I could fight, and would keep fighting, until it was possible. As I stared out the window, the sky began to brighten, and a new light began to form on the horizon. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing I knew for sure: my path would be my own, and no one else could dictate it. The cycle had been broken, and I was finally free.